Sports reporter Tony Barnhart once wrote, "Save some Southerners' unshakable belief that the Civil War was in fact a war of Northern aggression. Nothing is more ingrained in the Southern psyche than the love of college football, not as a game, but as a way of life." Growing up an hour outside of Tuscaloosa, I went to every Alabama home game with my father. Once I moved away, I began to study the history of the South, to try and make sense of its dark past, its complicated present, and my relationship with it. The 1926 Rose Bowl fascinated me. It was Alabama's first national championship, but for the South, it was a game that meant everything. The South experienced tremendous growth in the beginning decades of the 20th century. The economy was developing more than 20% faster than the national economy. As Southern industry thrived, American football gained immense popularity throughout the region.
So Southern teams would go north on what was invariably hailed as Northern invasions in the Southern newspapers. They would invariably lose the game, and then they would come home to hosannas and much praise for defending the honor of the Southland.
Since 1916, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena had been the only postseason collegiate bowl game in the country. A Southern team had never been seriously considered by the bowl committee. In 1925, the South had a clear-cut candidate in dominating, unbeaten Alabama. Still, a bowl representative said he'd never heard of Alabama's team and couldn't take a chance mixing a lemon with a rose. Collegiate football's popularity in the 1920s created a furious backlash in the academic community. An association of professors said football promoted drinking, dishonesty, and neglect of academic work. These and other concerns led Dartmouth, Yale, and Illinois to drop out of consideration for the bid. The bowl committee flirted with an unbeaten Tulane team, but finally offered an invitation to the Crimson Tide.
On January 1st, 1926, crowds of Southerners gathered in theaters to hear the game announced over telegraph wire from Pasadena.
Tales of the game started flashing over telegraph lines. Confidence in the Crimson Tide began to wane. Wilson intercepts an Alabama pass, and the Huskies march 85 yards for an easy touchdown. Alabama's offense has stopped cold, and Washington is driving again. Wilson rolls to the right, tossing a 20-yard pass for another score. The only bright spot, the point after both touchdowns, is missed.
The entire first half was a disappointment. Washington was up 12-0. In the third quarter, the Crimson Tide displayed an inspiring comeback.
Alabama had scored 3 touchdowns in 7 minutes of playing time. The Tide held off Washington with a pair of interceptions.
After 2 interceptions, Alabama was up 20-12. The dumbfounded Washington team regrouped and managed to score a fourth quarter touchdown. But as the minutes dwindled, Washington attempted a desperate pass down the field. The Alabama defense intercepted the ball and held the game 20-19. With the final whistle blown, the underdogs from Alabama had defeated top-ranked Washington. Even newspapers could not deny Alabama's win was a triumph for the entire South.
And it was a sublime tonic for Southerners who were buffeted by a legacy of defeat, military defeat, a legacy of poverty, and a legacy of isolation from the American political and cultural mainstream.
Reports in the newspapers would have been just like the reports from January 2nd, January 3rd, January 4th, 1926. That's the way they would have described it. It would have been the battle to end all battles. It was as if Southerners had proven something that the South had been trying to prove ever since the Civil War, that we were as good as anybody else.
Southerners regarded this 1926 Rose Bowl as a renewal of cultural identity.
Suppose Alabama had lost badly in 1926. Suppose they had been defeated by 40 points. Would football then have become the sort of important, defining experience for Southerners that it is going to become over the next 5 decades? And my answer to that is no, it would not have, because the South would have just been proved yet again to be inferior in some other dimension of life. And what would have happened, I think, is the South would have found some other way to excel. It would have invested this kind of emotional energy and physical commitment to something else.
The modern South is a confusing blend of assimilation, pride, defiance, and hypocrisy. A definition that undeniably applies to the Southern love for college football.